out of the conflict now. Alex Booth, I'm pleased to say, he's the head of research at Kepler. He's going to join us to talk through so much of this. And I really don't like to start with a basic question, Alex, but I've got to ask you, how high could oil prices go? Is there a ceiling?
Hi, good morning, Rosanna. I think when it comes to price, you've got to break it down into the kind of the short-term volatility and then the longer-term impacts of all of this. When it comes to the short term, as we've seen in the last 2 days, never mind going back into last week, you can see 5+% swings very easily on any, not even massive news announcements. So at the front of the curve, or sorry, maybe the front of the curve, but the prompt action, it's just a number at this point. You could easily see another $5–10 from here before things start to settle down. And that's because there's so much uncertainty at the moment, certainly within the oil markets, around what the next steps are. Longer term, the way that corporates are moving out of Russia, that is obviously going to have an impact in the ability for Russia to continue to produce as it has done previously. So I think we should see a whole shifting up of the curve in line with what a lot of the other analysts are saying. $100 a barrel plus in the medium term makes a lot of sense given the situation currently.
Now, as you said there, so much of this is based on uncertainty about what's going to happen. We do keep hearing voices from officials saying nothing is off the table with regards to Russia's energy exports. Currently, though, barrels of Russian crude still out there, still out at sea. But can I ask you just sort of how distasteful it is for traders, how it's feeling in terms of having to deal with Russian oil and if that's impacting the demand at all?
Very much so. And I think what's happening is there's a lot of discussion about how we can potentially sanction oil or gas is a lot harder, but oil is still there on the table, as you say. But what's happening in the market is self-sanctioning, as it's being styled. The numbers that were being talked about for discounts to Brent for Urals crude, so that's the major kind of crude flowing into the west from Russia. There were unsold prompt cargoes for the middle of the month at a discount of minus $18.60. Now, this is staggeringly large discounts to Brent. Basically, the market is saying, we know that legally we can take it, but the risks are just far too high, whether it's from a financing point of view, an insurance point of view, organizing the vessels to actually take it, the freight. Nobody wants to be left in 1 week's time, 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time with essentially a distressed cargo that they just can't own. So the market is already stepping away. We're seeing loadings, though vessels are still loading from the major Russian crude exporting ports. But the danger is that these are just going to end up floating in quite a short space of time.
Yeah, it's fascinating insight, Alex. Thanks for that. Let's talk about this special release of the 60 million barrels per day. You heard Goldman Sachs there saying symbolic, just not enough. I'm seeing plenty of other comments in the market. So what was it for?
Well, I think they have to be seen to be doing something. And this is the difficult situation that certainly Biden in the US, no surprise here, given his political situation, given the midterms this year, he has to be seen to be doing something to try to combat this incredibly high oil price. The problem is that the US is still releasing SPR crude volumes from when it attempted to stabilize oil prices back last year. We're still seeing, I think it's 2 million barrels a week coming out of SPR facilities. So, and that was when oil was that was organized when oil was or announced when oil was at $78 a barrel. It just doesn't work in that kind of volume. It's not big enough. And the timing of this release just doesn't really take into account the immediacy of the problem. We would need to see significantly more volumes flowing and a lot more quickly than 30 million barrels from the US, plus everything else in the rest of the world can really address.
And we do, of course, have an OPEC meeting later today. And I just want to ask about Saudi Arabia in the terms of this. Is it time for them now to step in? They've got spare capacity. Should they be deploying it?
They are pretty much anyone's with spare capacity. This is the problem for OPEC Plus at the moment. Between Saudis and UAE, they could increase. What we've been looking at through the last year plus has been the majority of the other countries really struggling to increase their supply in line with expectations of the extra 400,000 barrels a day. So you would have to see a kind of a unilateral change from Saudi and UAE to combat this. The danger is that if it's across OPEC Plus, they show their hand that they can't really do it as a whole. If it's Saudi and UAE going alone, then they're really butting up against the rest of the organization and then against Russia as well. So they're in a very difficult situation within the group. There will, of course, be a lot of pressure externally, but I think the retort from them is, well, the US, there's nothing stopping you producing as well. Why don't you kind of talk domestically about what you can do to increase oil supply? Never mind what we're doing as well.
Absolutely. And OPEC Plus, of course, or OPEC itself tries to avoid talking about politics, but will be interesting to see them meet later on today. Alex Booth from Kepler, great to have you with us.